to take advantage of real threat intelligence, common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. Polywall by Bandora Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed in partnership with the Department of Defense, Polywall is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial today at bandorasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. Skeleton keys, golden tickets, forged packs, DC Sync, DC Shadow. The Active Directory attack surface is expanding faster than admins can keep up with. Securing your environment begins with implementing least privilege administrative models, but does not end there. Many organizations send Active Directory syslog events to a SIM platform. However, logs are noisy, of limited scope, and are time-consuming to review and act upon. Active Directory is secure when it's clean, understood, configured properly, monitored closely, and controlled tightly. StealthBits technologies provide solutions that monitor, secure, and detect the latest threats against Active Directory. Visit them today at stealthbits.com to learn more.
All right, welcome back. It's still episode 100, second segment. And we're going to do a little bit of a difference. We're going to keep Scott, and we're going to keep going on some of this conversation and looking at how to make things work a little bit better. But let me just make a quick announcement. We got a webcast 3 days away. So that's right. It's going to be this September 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Tips and tricks. We like tips and tricks if they're helpful for defending the enterprise using open source tools. You know, it's going to be entertaining and educational, and hopefully we'll get to see you there. All right, so we left off, Scott. We were talking about you have something that works. So you've reached out either opportunistically because you're at a meeting, or you reached out to somebody because you know what you need for security and what they need to get done. Maybe you see an alignment. You find a way to be beneficial to them and helpful. And you said, but you've got to make sure you keep building on that relationship. So what do you do next?
Well, I think it really comes down to you taking the initiative, right? Because as you mentioned earlier, a lot of roles and responsibilities within a company are very, very busy. They lack time. Time is not a commodity. It's something that is very, very precious. And by the way, that's also something that should hold true in your personal life as well. That's probably a whole nother segment or a whole nother conversation. But you have to be the one to initiate those conversations, and you have to help the other people kind of see the value, and you have to make the effort to work with those folks. And in return, you should see that coming back the other way. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that a lot of folks run into is that level of accountability, right? So if you're working with somebody and you're expecting them to come back to you with some information, you have to hold them accountable. You have to keep that conversation, that dialogue going. You can't just let things fall by the wayside. So often I've seen where you're having a conversation with somebody, or you're working on something together, or just even something simple like you send them an email or you make a phone call and you never hear back from them. Well, you're the one that has to keep that conversation going. Unfortunately, a lot of times they get busy, right? Same thing is true for you. If they reach out to you, you know, they're responsible for continuing that conversation going as well, because you have to have that two-way open line of communication. That's just really best behavior. I mean, that's not even a security function. That's just really how you work with people inside of a corporation, inside of an organization. Beyond that, common goals. So, I mean, let's talk for a second about like a communications team, like a media affairs team, for example. What is their job? Their job is to communicate with the media, to respond to inquiries, to put out press releases, and to just generally work with the public. Well, what does that have to do with information security? Let's think about it. What if you have a breach? What if you're a company that has, you know, lots of customer information? What if you're a company that has some type of national interest of some sort, right? Well, does that communication team have all the talking points? Do they have a crisis communication plan that incorporates what would happen, what they would say, what are the talking points, what are the sound bites for a cybersecurity compromise or a breach of information? Probably not. Most communications teams don't. So how can you help them be better prepared for the eventuality of something like that happening by being proactive, excuse me, and building a relationship to actually help them develop those talking points. Maybe it's taking a look at an internal document and editing it to include cybersecurity talking points for a breach. There's probably a lot of different potentials, but if you take that general concept by trying to understand what somebody else is doing, what it's like to work in their shoes, stand in their shoes for a day without actually doing so, you can start to comprehend what they might need from you. Same is true with a supply management team. Supply management organizations are constantly getting beat up by vendors. They're getting phone calls. They're responding to people left and right, wondering why their contract isn't done, what's holding it up. Well, how can you help them? How can you streamline things for them? There's a variety of different techniques, and the same thing is true for legal, right? So legal is dealing with litigation matters. People are suing the company you work for. They're issuing, electronic discovery holds. And these are all things that you can help with. Oftentimes, legal organizations don't think of contacting their cybersecurity workforce because they're just used to using outside counsel at a really, really high expense to facilitate a lot of that electronic discovery and those legal holds. But what if you can do it cheaper? What if you could put process in place that streamlines that and makes it more effective for them? Those are just three examples. I could probably go on and on, but let me stop there because otherwise I could keep talking about this and we won't get anything else in.
So I think that legal and security share a lot of common goals, like privacy and decreasing risk and things like that. It sounds like you do research almost before you approach a team or a human to talk about what their goals are and what you can do for them and try to build up that reputational capital. How do you do intelligence gathering? Do you map out who the people are, and how do you figure out who the influencers are?
Well, I start off by stalking them online exclusively. No. So I try to envision myself doing their job is what I do, right? So if I'm a lawyer, which I only play one on TV, I try to envision what it's like standing in a courtroom and responding to opposing counsel and trying to picture what they must feel like in that situation. And it's got to be uncomfortable. You got to feel a little heat under the collar, maybe a little sweat on the brow. Understanding what they're going through helps you drive some level of empathy, which helps you better support them and better think through what kind of challenges that they might be going through and how you can facilitate that. So, I do my research as well. I'll look at policies that they might have. I'll talk to people that they might have interacted with on another matter and just say, hey, what do you think about Sally, or what do you think about Bob, and how this situation went through? So yeah, I'll do a little bit of intelligence gathering. I guess you could say it, but it's just really more about trying to understand what they're going through and what makes them sweat and what makes them, also want to overachieve, and then helping facilitate both of those situations with them.
Do you, so it's hard to get people to open up about these things sometimes. They don't want to look bad. They want to seem competent. They want to seem like everything's under control. How would you get through that veneer that people have, especially at work, and when they don't want to lose control over their realm, their area of whatever they're responsible for, and allow you to help them?
Yeah, first off, there's no silver bullet for this. Every single person is a little different. Every single person is going to be either more or less guarded with their approach and what they're willing to share and the level of trust that they're willing to engage in with you. Sometimes those walls don't break down for years. I can think of people that I worked with that the walls never broke down, but you still identified ways to work with them productively. And other times, the opposite bookend, which is people sharing way too much, way too quickly, makes you kind of wonder what their motives are. So, there's kind of that two-way street there. But I think what you're really getting at is how do you interface with people about cybersecurity topics in a way that's productive for you both? And what I've always found is just transparency. Say, hey, listen, I'm really worried about this. This keeps me awake at night, and here's why it keeps me awake at night. I'd really like to understand your perspective of how you're not losing sleep over this, right? Like, I see this particular situation. Maybe it's a massive exposure in a giant system that does financial planning or financial management in your company, something along those lines. Maybe it's a massive exposure in your customer information. Maybe it's a non-compliance situation, right, that nobody's really dealing with because nobody's giving it the attention it needs. Whatever the case is, oftentimes expressing how it makes you feel can get somebody else to essentially try to get you to not feel that way. So you can build a relationship from that capacity as well by just expressing yourself. And maybe that's not comfortable to do. I mean, it's not always comfortable, honestly, for me to express exactly how I'm feeling to other people that maybe I don't know very well. But once you can kind of get yourself past that and realize that by you telling somebody else what you're worried about, what you're challenged about, where you think there's issue for the company, and maybe asking them why that isn't as much of a concern for them, you can really start to develop an understanding of where they're coming from. And that gives you the ability to further that relationship and continue working with them.
So do you think that you need to have almost a personal relationship with them too, beyond just the business relationship, just so that it doesn't feel transactional when you're trying to get something from somebody, or even if you're offering something to somebody, like help? Do you want to have maybe a personal relationship with them, or is that going too far?
I mean, it depends, right? There's nothing stopping you from going to Thursday and having happy hour or something like that after work, right? If you have that kind of dynamic in that relationship and that culture within your workplace. But I mean, you don't necessarily have to have a personal relationship. But one of the things that I've always found to be really helpful in just driving that positive relationship, and that, even when you're dealing with really, really tough to solve problems, having a positive relationship. So if you're reaching out to somebody on Monday morning and you have a question that you're just dying to ask them, you don't just dive right in with the question. You say, hey, how was your weekend? How's Monday going for you? Are you sufficiently caffeinated? And you just have a jovial kind of dialogue with them that doesn't really mean anything before you dig right into the workplace issue that you need to deal with. A lot of people don't take that approach. They just come right at you with, hey, what's the problem with this? Or how's this work? Or why is this messed up? Or what are we going to do about this issue over here? Instead of saying, hey, how was your weekend? And, questions like that can go a long ways. And you can put that into the personal relationship category if you like. I just think of it as just generally being nice and someone that's fun to be around, and somebody that actually cares about what other people did over the weekend and actually what they're doing in their lives. So, I guess to some degree it could be considered a personal relationship, but, however that manifests itself for you is going to probably differ. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit different depending on whether somebody's more introverted or extroverted. An introvert might not want to talk to you about what they did on the weekend, but an extrovert may be more than happy to, and that may build the relationship. So I guess it does kind of matter who you're dealing with.
That's exactly right. And that comes back to that intelligence piece, right? Who are you talking to?
Yeah, and what I was going to say is listening to both of this, the part that really kind of stood out to me here is, it's okay to appear to be vulnerable, and it's okay to take an interest in somebody else's life. It may not lead into a big personal relationship, but if they have shared something of importance to them, to you, then it's okay to follow up on that or to remember that. And I think it's equally important then. And what I really liked, Scott, was when you mentioned, being, hey, I'm concerned about X. What I've often found when I do that is sometimes they dismiss it at first, but then you can circle back around it and they'll say, oh, you know what? I'm not concerned about that. Here's why. But you know what I am concerned about? And what I find is, like if they're telling you and you feel that you're on the same page and that's not a concern for them, let it go. But if they just told you what is a concern for them, now you know what to focus on. And that's one of those things that I like about that. How do you make the time to do that then? So I've already got more stuff to get done in a day than I possibly can. more demands getting put on my plate, security's growing in importance. How on earth do I make the time to now maintain all these relationships?
Yeah, so I think what that comes down to is kind of the makeup of your security organization. And this actually goes a lot to, I think, the mentality that you need to have as a security leader. So first and foremost, as a security leader, you should be pushing the decisions around technology adoption and technology implementation and technology needs down to the lowest level in your organization that makes sense. You should not be the one ever deciding what SIM you use, what IPS you're installing, what vulnerability scanner you have in place. That is not your job. Your job is to kind of shake hands and kiss babies, so to speak, and get people to support your program, as well as supporting the team and their needs. So first and foremost, if you're spending most of your time doing product evaluations and taking a look at the geek stuff, that's kind of why you got into this industry, you might want to second guess why you're in leadership, because that's not the job that you should be doing. Now, if on the flip side, if you're a one-person show and you are the only person, I'd say that you probably have to kind of dedicate a good chunk of your time to having conversations and getting to know people. It might be a 25% set of responsibilities that you just have to allocate the time for. But one of the things that I've seen security leaders really get bogged down by, especially in larger organizations, is just getting involved in things and conversations that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be involved in. And that really that preoccupies their time in ways that's just not productive for the organization. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but that is one of the biggest challenges I've seen security leaders have, and one of the biggest mistakes that I've made. I mean, and if you look at the vendors, right, if you're a CISO out there for a large company, how many vendors do you have reaching out to you on an ongoing basis? You probably get like 10, 15, 20 emails and phone calls a day. You can't be the person to make those decisions, and you need to push those decisions further down in your organization. And then, of course, delegate as well. Empower people to leverage, push the line organization to choose what vulnerability scanner they want. Push the line organization to choose what technology they need to implement for two-factor authentication. You might have your preference, but your preference doesn't matter because you're not the one dealing with it every day. So I'm going to get off my soapbox on that topic right now, because that is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen leaders make.
It's true, and there's studies that say that if you get people involved in the decision, that they will be more engaged throughout the process. So if you make a decision and hand it to them, then they're not going to be as invested.
That's right. That's right. And I think we can all think of at least one scenario in our careers where somebody said, no, we're going to go do this, and you weren't on board, and you kind of begrudgingly did it because, at the end of the day, the boss is still the boss, right? If the boss comes to you and says, hey, we're going to stand on one foot and hop around all day, if you want to keep working there, you're going to stand on one foot and hop around all day. But absolutely 100%, if you're pushing decisions down to where they need to be made, not only does that free up your time to go focus on other things that are probably more aligned to the role and responsibility that you have as a kind of senior security leader, but it also makes those line organizations own the solutions, and then they're vested in it.
No, I like that. And, there's two pieces that I just pulled out of that. First is, you don't have to be the only person with a solution, which means there's a lot of ways to solve it. And what I like then is that you can be in a consultative role in that approach. So you can push the decision down to the line organization. And think about that for a second. If you're listening to this and you haven't tried that out yet, it's the difference between saying, I'm from security and here's the vulnerability scanner you're going to use because I like it and it's the best, as opposed to saying, hey, I think you guys are actually qualified to both run this and make that decision. Let's make sure we get you guys the right technology and solution you need. My team's completely here. We'll backstop you. We'll help you. We'll participate. Whatever you need from us, we got it. But, hey, you guys are in this too, and we know you're part of the team, and what can we do to help you? That's a completely different message than most of these teams are used to hearing. And if they choose something you don't like, but, yeah, you know what? It's getting the job done and it suits their needs better, embrace it. Support that. I think that, Scott, is fantastic advice. I like that a lot. The other thing I think is really kind of refreshing is I think a lot of people will look at, a lot of our partner interviews and I go, well, but Scott's from Rapid7. Of course he thinks we should all buy tools. And here you are saying, look, yeah, you need tools. You've got to free up your time. But that's not your job. Your job is to make sure somebody else in the organization is evaluating it and that they're making good decisions and that you're reviewing the impacts and the effects of those decisions. But no, you've got to prioritize those relationships and these other things and that strategy and that direction and get that context right. And yes, tools will certainly make it up, but gosh, think about the power of that. If you're listening to this right now, you're pushing the power to the people who are going to operate those tools to make those decisions. And a lot of times, increasingly, it's not the security team running those tools. I've worked with a lot of organizations where they're not responsible for patch management. They're not responsible for vulnerability management. They're not responsible for any of these things. They're responsible for supporting them, and those things need to get done. And I think it's refreshing. So I'm excited that you shared that, and I think that really kind of connects home. So I like that. April, we got a couple minutes left. Is there anything kind of burning from your perspective that you think we should bring up or address, or maybe put Scott on the hot seat for one last round here before we close it out?
Sure. So Scott, I know that you are very interested in ICS, industrial control systems, and you did work with power companies and are really interested in that. And I know that there are a lot of threats against ICS these days, and it's a big problem that needs to be addressed. How are manufacturers starting to fix these things, and how do we deal with like the legacy ICS that exists within business today? Is the answer controls? Is the answer? I mean, we have to address this problem somehow. What do you recommend for security managers who have ICS within their environment, and what kind of approach do you recommend?
I love that question. It's got about 100 different offshoots from it, so I'm going to try to stay as focused as I can. ICS security is one of the things that I am absolutely most passionate about. So let me just start off by saying, in ICS networks, you will always have vulnerabilities. Just like your corporate IT network, you're always going to have vulnerabilities. The reason I start with that is because what ends up happening is a lot of security leaders think that they need to get to a zero-sum game when it comes to managing vulnerabilities. And in ICS environments and IT environments, just across the board, that is not possible. So once you get over that, you start to really think about what you should be doing and how you should be managing risk to those ICS environments. So basic common things like not connecting ICS systems to the internet, making sure that they're internally segmented, just very kind of mom and apple pie based security controls. Beyond that, I think one of the first things you have to do as a security professional, you need to start to understand how industrial control systems work, what they control, how they operate, how they communicate, what their wired component is, what their serial RS-232 connections consist of. Are there telco lines involved? Are you using radio frequencies? Do you have microwave shots? All of those different situations and how the technology works, that's going to help you further understand what you're dealing with. And that kind of goes into the legacy camp. And I'll come back to that for a second. On the manufacturer side, what I've seen is several manufacturers, actually most of the larger manufacturers that you see out there, are making more investment into the security of their products and of their technology as best they can. But again, they are also developing technology just like any other company, just like a major operating system vendor is, just like hardware manufacturers that have, firmware. So there are always going to be new vulnerabilities that are discovered, regardless of the best efforts that the manufacturers put in place. But to answer your question directly, I am seeing manufacturers do more in regards to implementing security within their design criteria for their products. That said, however, one of the things that's interesting and unique about industrial control systems specifically, and I don't care if you're working in the power and energy space or it's healthcare and you're dealing with medical devices, or it's manufacturing, you're running an amusement park, or you're manufacturing alcohol, you're still using industrial control systems. A lot of the way that these industrial control systems work is for operator ease of use. So things like not requiring authentication, not using crypto to secure the communications while in transit. Those are a couple of key things that you're going to continue to see in these environments. So what this comes down to is that you have to put the mom and apple pie security control package in place, right? You have to isolate these systems as much as possible. To the extent that you can use things like air gapping or one-way data diodes, that's just going to help you further isolate these systems. To the extent that you can, as long as you're putting in, some type of a firewall or some type of a device that can control ingress, egress, filtering into and out of these protected networks, that's better, right? But the most important thing that you can do is understand how these systems work and monitor for that. So if you're thinking about watching logs in your IT environment, how are you also monitoring logs within your OT environment, your operational technology environment? And oftentimes the process is going to be the same, but what you're looking for is going to be slightly different. So I'd be happy to dig in deeper on that. I don't know how much time we have left, but just to answer your question directly, I am seeing improvements. Operators are still challenged when it comes to running industrial control system networks. That's not going to go away. And the best approach here across the board is to implement a really strong defense in depth process and educate as many people as you possibly can when it comes to understanding and working through the vulnerabilities within an ICS network.
What kind of security awareness training do you recommend in regards to ICS?
Often it's going to be very similar to any other type of IT security training, right? So you definitely, well, first off, you got to understand what the business practices are. So a lot of ICS administrators, they will use a corporate laptop to both work in their IT environment and work in their OT environment. Now, to the extent that you can influence that so that you have separate kind of a cleaner machine to work in the OT space, that's better. But as far as training is concerned, you got to understand what that operator is dealing with, right? Whether they're dealing with dedicated clean equipment or they're dealing with, potentially dirty equipment. Regardless of that, there are best practices across the board. So making sure that when you're getting emails that you know the source and sender. It's all of the common kind of security awareness, email awareness activities that you would do elsewhere. Basic practices like, don't use USB drives to bring data from this place into this place. Don't just arbitrarily plug laptops into network switches in remote locations that, probably aren't set up well to deal with any type of, malware or other type of intrusion coming within that environment because of the level of vulnerability that's in there. Also, teaching operators in OT environments to say something, helping them understand that if there's an operational outage, there could be a variety of different causes for it. Of course, go down that triage process that your equipment vendor would give you to do the diagnostics of your systems, but also notify a security team if you have a problem that isn't easy to identify, because there could be a cybersecurity nexus to this. And then, of course, don't forget about your physical security team, because in a situation where there could be some type of operational disruption, that physical security team should be working with you as well. And all three of you, your cyber team, your physical team, as well as your operations team, should be working in unison, in conjunction, to solve, especially those harder to solve problems that the diagnostic checks out just fine. That should be the biggest red flag, right? So look at what your systems are telling you, work with people that you might not normally work with to troubleshoot and diagnose a problem, and team up to figure out what that path forward is. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, building those people relationships, right? Those relationships are key. And I think I was quoted at an ICS conference a couple of years ago where I said, take your operator out for a beer. And I really mean that, right? Because oftentimes that is how you build these relationships, especially with people that work in, work out in substations and kind of in dirty environments. Building those relationships can often be a lot harder because they're working in an environment that's not like working in an office. So how do you find that common bond between you? So I'll pause there because I really like that question.
No, that was great. And actually, that's probably a great place to break the show. In fact, I love the fact that you brought us back at the end, all the way back to the beginning. What I hope is, if you were listening to this, is that you got some insights on not just the importance of the relationships, but how to broker those relationships, how to look at prioritizing it, that work, doing it, and then we took you into some pretty specific areas. So, Scott, this was fantastic. I really appreciate it, and clearly a lot of knowledge there that we're going to be able to tap into in the future. April, I really loved you sitting in Paul's chair. So thanks so much for joining us and being part of that, and I hope you come back again as well. Remember, everybody, we're back next week. We do still live stream 1 p.m. Eastern. But look for the show next week, and we'll have the article discussion that we missed this week. I think we did a much better job. In the meantime, you can catch me on Twitter at Catalyst. Hit me on LinkedIn. Let you know of today's show. And remember, exceptional leaders elevate the people around them. Here's to your great week of investing in yourself that elevates those around you. See ya.